Let's talk about hospital birth. Let me see if I can explain it. This is what the hundreds of mothers and fathers taught me in the early 70s when these skills were being developed. The hospital is a place. It's just a place. It's just a place. That means when we choose to give birth in that place, then we are choosing to give birth in the environment of that place. So that is what it is. When you go into a supermarket, it's a place, and that's the environment. If you are a religious person and go into your house of worship, it's a place. School, any place, it's a place. And you have to do something in that place. That thing that you have to do can take place in other places, but you are choosing, either because you want to or you are pressured and forced to, you are choosing to birth in that place that's called a hospital. And there are things that are going to happen to you in that place. In my generation, those were called assessments, monitoring, and procedures if necessary. They were slightly different than today because times change. Evidence-based practice changes. It's a place. When I gave birth in 1970 and my last birth in 1982, I gave birth in two different hospitals. They were places. The things that happened to or around me in 1970 were different than what happened to or around me in 1982. I went into my birth in 1970 into a hospital with Lamaze skills that my husband and I had learned, because there was a very high societal expectation that we all attend the first childbirth preparation classes, and they were entirely skills-based because we didn't have any choices as you do today. So what we did when we went to that place was we used our skills, and they did assessments, monitoring, and procedures. We didn't have a choice. Did we always like what they did to or around us? No. Did we constantly believe that our birth was being ripped off because those things were happening to or around us? No. Did the majority of us want to do without those things and just trust in nature? No. So the reality was we chose, or were pressured, or it was what people did at that time, went to the hospital, went to that place, and we did the activity of birthing our baby. And my generation of 1970 did that with no choices. So I couldn't get out of bed, I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink. I'd take my clothes off, basically lie there. But there wasn't constant fetal monitoring. They didn't have that then. They didn't have scalp electrodes. The cesarean rate was 4.5% because it was major abdominal surgery done to save women's lives. So all of us labored, whether we had risks or not, whether we had a good experience or a horrible experience, whether we coped well or suffered or had a good outcome or a tragic one. That was what birth was like in 1970, my lifetime. 1982, when I gave birth in a hospital, another place, things had dramatically changed. But it was interesting because in my generation in the United States, the labor and delivery nurses and obstetricians saw 8 out of 10 women using skills and fathers helping. By 1982, they were seeing less than 1 in 10, sometimes 1 in 20, because the childbirth trend of the day that changed in the late 1970s dismissed skills, said skills aren't going to achieve those natural births. No, they didn't. What skills achieved was the lack of suffering by women who had suffered for eons because they had lacked skills. So we didn't suffer. We had empowered births. We didn't like them. We didn't like the assessments, monitoring procedures necessarily, but we weren't willing to not have them. And we didn't call them interventions because that just confuses everybody. So I went to a second place when I gave birth in 1982. And because of my generation having behaved and coped and managed and looked like we were dealing and handling, staying on top of and feeling in control, with fathers really knowing how to help us, by 1982, very few women had skills. Men had less. They were told not to coach. They were told to just support women's choices. And women were going in with long birth plans of what they wanted and didn't want. The medical profession was trying to figure out what did women want and what did they didn't want. But the medical profession changed heaps, just as it had in the 70s when we didn't like the classical incisions of cesareans that cut us in the pubic bone to our belly button. We started wearing bikinis in the 80s, and we didn't want ugly scars, so the medical profession developed the bikini cut. They're clever. They respond to societal pressure. But they don't respond to nonsense, because fundamentally, what's going on in childbirth since the mid-70s has been a philosophical debate based around one simple sentence, which is pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events that rarely require medical care. And when we say that sentence, there's part of us that goes, yup, and another part of us goes, what? And it's the what part that causes the conflict, because one simple word in that sentence makes people divided, and that's the word normal. Pregnancy and childbirth are normal life events. What does the word normal mean? Well, for people who believe that going to the hospital means we can't have a normal or natural birth, or having interventions or assessments, monitoring procedures, so we can't have a natural or normal birth, are really using that word to mean good outcome, simple, manageable, can be done anywhere, by the side of the rice paddy, with the back of the taxi. And that's true. Absolutely true. Before medical care, we all birthed, we all labored and gave birth vaginally. It was normal, it was natural. And in the reality of things, normal and natural around pregnancy and childbirth means that anything that might happen could happen. It's normal to have an easy birth with a good outcome. No fuss, no muss, all done and dusted. And it's normal to suffer and still have a good outcome. It's normal to have a bad outcome, not suffer, or suffer and have a bad outcome. But now that we're in choices, women are suffering because how they envision birth isn't unfolding the way they want. So we're no longer living to the truth that there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like and babies don't come to plan. We're now living by sort of a post-reality that says we know what we want of our birth and they should give it to us. So all we need to do is to think about the pros and cons of interventions and tell them what we want, and the birth should unfold the way we envision it. And speaking to tens and thousands of women over the years globally, that's rare as hen's teeth. So when we give birth in a place, and we always give birth in some place, we might like it, fear it, hate it, might be safe or unsafe. Women give birth in the middle of war and famine, domestic violence, poverty. We give birth in a place, and we have to decide what we are going to do during that activity, in that place. So if you're going to have a birth in a place that has assessments, monitoring procedures, then you still have to do the activity. And that's why Birthing Better Families develop the skills that you're going to learn. We were going into hospitals with the Lamaze and Bradley method. those methods were focused on low-risk women having a low-risk birth, assuming that they could birth pain-free with fewer medical assessments, monitoring procedures, because those had become standardized. So in the 60s and 70s, we all went into the hospital using skills. And my generation changed childbirth for the better. And I experienced that change in 1982. But the difference was that in 1970 I had Lamaze, in 1982 I had the birthing better skills because I had developed them with hundreds of families. And so I knew what an evolution of being able to do the activity of birthing my baby meant. And when I gave birth in 1970, it was considered normal. It was a term pregnancy. I was induced because that was the standard of care. They did things to and around me that I didn't necessarily like, but that was what it was. Whereas when I gave birth last, I gave birth to an 8-week premature baby. And because of everybody seeing so many women in my generation skilled, the medical profession was much more relaxed, and they let me just birth them myself. And at the other hand, they said to me that they had never seen a woman birth her baby. Because in those 12 years, childbirth changed from skills that we were going to take into the hospital or home or birth center to no skills in making birth plans that we were going to take into the hospital or talk to our midwife about for home birth or birth center birth. The focus changed. Now you're listening to me. And what I'm saying to you 50 years later is that skills should have gone along with choices. We wouldn't be in the pickle we are now. They didn't, because the natural birth movement and famous authors dismissed them actively and aggressively, and dismissed the idea that your husband, partner, anybody, sister, anybody should be your birth coach. They should just support your choices. And this has been screwy, because you have to do the activity of birthing your baby, and you need skills. It's so rare. It's so infrequent. It's so life-transforming. And we need to elevate it to being skilled, and not just choices. You're lucky if you have choices. You're lucky if they unfold. You're lucky if you get everything you want. Most of us don't have those choices. Most of our choices change. Most of us have a birth that we didn't plan. It was unexpected. We can control us. I can control how I breathe. I can control what I do with my body. I can't control what I think, but I can control how I behave in relationship to my thinking. But any of you who have children or have gone to work at a job you don't like, or had a fight with your sister or brother or family member, my goodness, we don't always think positive thoughts. But if we have any common sense, we have the skills to behave positively. We need to have them in all of our hospital births. No matter what you're planning on or despairing about, if you go into that hospital to birth your baby, no matter how it unfolds, how close to what you wanted, how far away, you have to do the activity. Learn these skills. Work together with your baby. Continue to do that, and have your birth coach help you feel as though you are always coping and managing well. That's your dignity. That's what's going to leave you birth memories. All births. Birthing better families didn't distinguish one from the other. We were only interested in our own baby's birth. And we decided to be highly skilled to birth our babies. You'll be benefited. We've all been benefited. That's why I've spent 50 years of my life trying to explain to people how essential it is that it is normal and natural in pregnancy to self-learn birth and birth coaching skills, and use those birth and birth coaching skills to do the activity of birthing your baby. So get stuck into it and learn the skills so that you feel as confident doing the activity of birthing your baby, even though you can't practice beforehand, and this may be your first birth, or you may be seeking a VBAC, never having labored. But it's just like if you were told, okay, you can get into a car 9 months from now, or you can have sex 9 months from now, but you can't practice beforehand. Wouldn't you want to learn some skills? Really? And what if you had to drive for 12 to 24 hours nonstop? And what if the weather was really bad? Wouldn't you want to be able to have adaptable, adjustable, sustainable skills? And if the first time you had sex, imagine if you don't have skills, which most of us didn't have. And imagine we're highly skilled. Do we make love for 12 to 24 hours nonstop? Birth can be that, even if you're driving to the hospital, being prepped, waiting, and having surgery. You may spend 12 hours before your baby's born. And if you labor, it can be longer. So once you get to the hospital, just keep using the skills you were using before you got to the hospital. So keep going.